Who let this filthy black girl into my building? Vaughn Mercer didn't lower his voice. A young woman in a hoodie had just stepped into a billion-dollar boardroom, carrying nothing that looked impressive to the men sitting around the table. Blaine Kessler grabbed her arm. "Get out, right now." "Sir, your interpreter cancelled. I speak fluent Arabic." "Fluent?" Vaughn stared at her, then laughed. "You expect me to believe that?" A few men around the table laughed with him. Vaughn stepped closer. "Your mother spends her days on her knees cleaning my floors. She never even finished high school. And you, standing here in that hoodie, think you're qualified to sit at this table?" The young woman kept her eyes steady. "I can translate for you." "Fine," Vaughn said, "translate." Then his voice turned colder. "But if you make one mistake, your mother loses her job and you will be blamed for every dollar this deal costs us." The young woman didn't flinch. "I won't fail, sir." Her arms stayed still at her sides. Her expression didn't change, and what she was about to uncover would make Vaughn Mercer regret every word he had spoken. Her name was Nadia Carter. Before she ever entered that boardroom, Nadia was riding the subway with earbuds in, and her head lowered toward her phone. The screen was filled with Arabic legal vocabulary, contract terminology, financial language, Islamic finance structures, complex expressions used in international agreements. She silently repeated each phrase the way she had done for most of her life. It was a habit that began when she was still a child. Her phone buzzed. A message from her mother appeared. "Baby, I left my insulin at home. I can't leave the floor. Big event today. Please bring it if you can." Nadia changed direction immediately. She collected the insulin from their apartment and made her way uptown. Eventually, she stood outside Mercer Crestmont Tower, 60 floors of glass and steel rising above Park Avenue. It was the kind of building designed to make wealth look permanent and people without it feel temporary. The kind of place that seemed built to keep people like Nadia outside. The moment she walked through the lobby doors, heads turned. The woman behind the front desk looked her over slowly. Hoodie, sneakers, backpack. Then she reached toward the telephone. A security guard stepped in before Nadia even had a chance to explain herself. "Deliveries use the back entrance." "I'm not making a delivery." The guard looked at her again. "I'm here to see my mother. She works on the 60th floor. Name, Lorraine Carter, facilities staff." The guard checked a list with the expression of someone doing Nadia a personal favor. Then he pushed a visitor badge across the desk without looking at her. "Elevators are on the left. Don't touch anything." Nadia clipped the badge to her jeans and walked away. When the elevator opened on the 60th floor, the building seemed to transform. Marble floors, soft golden light, the smell of espresso and expensive leather, floor-to-ceiling windows looked down on Manhattan. Nadia found her mother in the staff corridor. Lorraine Carter was folding cleaning cloths beside a supply cart. Her hands were cracked from decades of chemicals and cold water. Braces wrapped around both knees after years of kneeling on hard floors. Nadia handed her the insulin. Lorraine pulled her into a tight hug. "Thank you, baby." Then she stepped back. "Now go home, study." Nadia turned toward the elevator. That was when she heard something through the partly open boardroom door. Raised voices. A man speaking sharply in English. And beneath the English, something almost nobody else on the floor would have noticed. A sentence in Arabic. Then another. Nadia slowed. Arabic had belonged to her father before it belonged to her. It lived inside her memory, inside her childhood, inside the sound of old recordings played late at night in small apartments. She stopped near the doorway. Then she looked inside. That choice changed everything. The professional interpreter expected for the meeting had cancelled. The boardroom was already tense. Nadia explained that she could help. And, after being mocked, threatened, and treated as if she were an inconvenience, she was finally allowed to sit in the interpreter's chair. The leather felt cold beneath her. The tables stretched across the room in polished mahogany. Crystal water glasses sat beside contract binders thick enough to look like bricks. 9 men in tailored suits watched her. Some of those suits probably cost more than Lorraine earned in months. An executive near the windows leaned toward the man beside him. "I didn't bother whispering quietly enough. Mercer has lost his mind. He's letting a street kid touch a billion-dollar deal." His colleague smiled. "Give her a few minutes. She'll fall apart. They always do." Nobody adjusted Nadia's chair. Nobody offered her water. Nobody asked if she needed anything. Nobody even bothered to say her name. She was treated like an object that had wandered into the room and had not yet earned the right to belong. At the far end of the table sat Sheikh Karim al-Rashid. He wore a white robe and reading glasses, low on his nose. His expression gave nothing away. Beside him, a younger delegate watched Nadia differently, not with contempt, with curiosity. Near the middle of the table sat Celeste Whitmore, silver hair, navy blazer, one of the largest pension fund managers involved in the transaction. Celeste hadn't said a word since Nadia entered, but her eyes moved constantly. She was watching everything, not reacting, not judging too quickly, just recording the room in her mind. Vaughn dropped a contract binder in front of Nadia. It hit the table hard. I didn't slide it toward her. He dropped it as though he were tossing scraps. Page 1, start talking. No introduction, no explanation, not even a glass of water. Nadia opened the binder. Vaughn began reading the opening terms. Investment structure, capital allocation schedules, risk-sharing frameworks. He read quickly, deliberately quickly. Every sentence was packed with dense financial language. Subordinated convertible notes, ratchet anti-dilution provisions, cross-collateralized debt instruments, compounding waterfall distribution schedules. Vaughn wasn't simply presenting a contract. I was trying to drown her in technical language before she had a chance to breathe. Nadia began translating. There was no hesitation. She didn't translate word for word. She did something better. She converted American financial expressions into Gulf Arabic equivalents that carried the same meaning and the same cultural force. When Vaughn used an American expression about leaving money on the table, Nadia didn't translate the words literally. She chose an Arabic phrase that carried the same economic meaning and emotional weight for a Gulf investor. Sheikh Karim's eyebrows lifted slightly. His younger delegate leaned forward. The executive near the windows stopped whispering. His smile disappeared. Vaughn noticed. Hein didn't like it, so he pushed harder. He spoke faster. Hein buried acronyms inside subclauses and subclauses inside long legal sentences designed to make even experienced interpreters stumble. Nadia caught everything. Her voice remained calm, almost soft, but exact. Every Arabic phrase landed cleanly. Every pause came in the right place. Every number matched. Every decimal matched. Every contractual reference matched. When Vaughn finally paused to drink water, the silence in the room felt different. Blaine Kessler leaned toward him. Where did she come from? Vaughn didn't answer. His jaw was tight. His fingers tapped lightly against the table. The kind of rhythm anxious men make when they are trying to look relaxed. Sheikh Karim, who had seemed ready to leave before Nadia arrived, was now leaning toward the table with both hands resting flat in front of him. I was listening closely. Celeste Whitmore still hadn't spoken, but the corner of her mouth moved almost imperceptibly. She understood what was happening. The young woman in a hoodie had changed the balance of the entire room without ever raising her voice. As the meeting continued, Vaughn eventually stopped trying to outrun Nadia. His aggression faded. Something else took its place. Fear. She wasn't stumbling. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't pretending. She was better than the professional interpreter he had hired, and everyone at the table knew it. During a pause between contract sections, Vaughn leaned toward Blaine. He lowered his voice and switched to Arabic. It was broken, conversational Arabic, picked up during several years of business in Doha. Good enough for private comments, not good enough for legal interpretation. She's better than I expected, Vaughn said. Keep her away from Section 12B. When we get there, I'll handle the Arabic myself. Blaine frowned. Your Arabic isn't strong enough for that. Doesn't matter. She doesn't go near that section. Clear? Nadia didn't turn her head. She didn't blink. She translated the next paragraph without missing a word. But she heard everything. Section 12B. Keep her away. Vaughn would handle it himself. Why? What was hidden there? Nadia didn't know yet. But whatever it was, it mattered enough for Vaughn to whisper about it, in a language he assumed she couldn't understand. Her father's voice returned to her memory. Not as an ordinary memory, as a recording. A cassette tape. A small Harlem apartment. A man who knew he might not always be there, leaving behind his voice so his daughter could continue learning after he was gone. Listen first, Nadia. The truth is often hiding inside what people say when they think you can't understand them. Nadia kept translating. But now she was listening for more than language. She had learned Arabic from a dead man's voice. Her father was Samir Carter. Hai had been a United Nations interpreter, born in Khartoum, Sudan. Raised between continents. He spoke 6 languages before he turned 30. Interpreted in war zones, refugee camps, and courtrooms where the accuracy of one sentence could decide whether someone lived freely or disappeared behind a prison wall. Nadia remembered the smell of black coffee and old books whenever she thought about him. Every evening after dinner, Samir would sit on the floor of their small Harlem apartment with Nadia in his lap. A whiteboard rested across his knees. I traced Arabic letters, slowly, one at a time. He said every sound out loud. Nadia repeated after him. I made the language into a game. Then music. Then something that belonged only to the two of them. Eventually, Samir began recording cassette tapes, dozens of them, his voice reading vocabulary, grammar rules, children's stories, proverbs, legal expressions, and labeled each tape carefully. Nadia was 7 when she finally asked why. Samir knelt in front of her and looked directly into her eyes. Because I won't always be here, Habibti. But this language will. And when you listen to these tapes, you'll hear me. And died less than a year later. A stroke. At his desk. In the middle of a sentence. In the middle of a translation. I was 42 years old. After Samir died, everything changed. The apartment was gone. The savings disappeared. Lorraine took the only job she could find that offered dependable health insurance to a widow raising a child alone. She became a cleaner at Mercer Crestmont Tower. And she stayed. 22 years. The same floors. The same service corridors. The same silence. The same deliberate invisibility. But every night in their smaller apartment, Nadia pressed play on her father's tapes. Samir's voice filled the room as if he had never left. She read Arabic newspapers online. She watched Gulf business broadcasts. She listened to Arabic news until the rhythms of the anchors became familiar. She earned a full scholarship to Columbia University. She studied linguistics and international contract law. She finished at the top of her class. She was the only student in her program who hadn't learned Arabic from a classroom professor. She had learned it from a father who loved her enough to leave his voice behind. Nobody in the boardroom knew any of that. To them, she was simply the cleaner's daughter. The next contract sections went smoothly. Then Vaughn changed tactics. He stopped trying to speak faster than Nadia could translate. Instead, he began setting traps. Small ones, quiet ones, the kind only someone who truly understood legal language would catch. In one section, Vaughn deliberately misstated a percentage. He said 14% allowed. The written contract said 40%, a difference large enough to cost the Emirati side hundreds of millions of dollars if nobody noticed. Nadia noticed. She stopped, looked at the page, then looked at Vaughn. I believe you said 14%, sir. The contract reads 40%. Would you like to clarify that for the record? The room became still. Vaughn's eye twitched. Typographical error. 14 is correct. Sheikh Karim's younger delegate quietly circled the number on his own copy. He said nothing. Hein didn't need to. Later, Vaughn used a legal term and then defined it incorrectly during his explanation. The difference was subtle, but the new definition shifted liability away from Mercer Crestmont and toward the Emirati Fund. Nadia caught that too. She translated exactly what Vaughn had said. Then she added calmly, for clarity, the standard legal definition of this term differs from the explanation that was just provided. I want to make sure both parties are working from the same understanding. Blaine's pen stopped moving. Vaughn stared at Nadia, not with anger this time, with recognition. I was beginning to understand that the young woman in the hoodie wasn't merely translating his words. She understood what he was trying to do with them. The executive near the window, the one who had called her a street kid, no longer met her eyes. Celeste uncrossed her arms for the first time. She leaned back slightly. There was something close to admiration in her expression. Nadia translated the next sections flawlessly. The binder grew thinner. Section 12B moved closer. Every time Vaughn glanced at Blaine, the look carried the same message. Almost there. Be ready. During the transition into the final sections, Blaine stood and walked behind Nadia's chair. He leaned down near her shoulder. You're doing well, he said quietly, almost friendly. But you look tired. The next section is extremely technical. Why don't you take a break? Get some water. Walk around. It sounded like concern. It wasn't. Nadia kept her eyes on the binder. I'm fine, thank you. Blaine stayed behind her. Seriously. We can pause. Nobody would blame you. I said I'm fine. Blaine returned to his seat. Nadia saw him exchange a look with Vaughn. She isn't leaving. The next section went cleanly. Then there was only one left. Section 12B. Vaughn cleared his throat, adjusted his tie, straightened the pages in front of him. Small movements. Nadia read them like sentences. I was nervous. Miss Carter, Vaughn said, suddenly casual. This final section is mostly technical boilerplate. I can handle the Arabic myself, save you the trouble. Nadia looked at him. Consistency matters in legal interpretation, sir. I'd like to finish what I started. Vaughn held her gaze, then looked away. He opened section 12B. So did Nadia. Everything Vaughn Mercer had spent more than a year building was close to collapse, because the young woman he had treated like dirt was about to read the one paragraph he never wanted properly translated. Before they continued, Vaughn called for a short break. The request sounded natural. Nadia knew it wasn't. The moment people began standing, Vaughn pulled Blaine toward the side corridor. They needed a way to keep her away from Section 12B. Nadia needed to decide what she was willing to risk. She stepped into the staff hallway. The air changed immediately. No espresso, no expensive leather, only industrial cleaner, cold concrete, and fluorescent lights. She found Lorraine inside the supply area restocking paper towels. Her mother's hands looked raw. The braces around her knees were the same ones she had worn for years. When Lorraine saw Nadia, there was no pride in her face, only fear. "Baby, what are you doing in there?" Blaine Kessler walked past here earlier. He looked at me like I was already fired. "Mum, I need to tell you something. There's a section in the contract. Something they don't want me to translate. I think they're hiding something." Lorraine grabbed Nadia's arm. "Stop. Right now. Mum, listen to me." "No, you listen to me." Lorraine's voice cracked. "I've worked in this building for 22 years. 22 years without one complaint. Not one. I kept my head down. I kept my mouth shut. I cleaned every mess they left behind. I smiled even when they didn't look at me. I did that for you, every single day. For you." Her grip tightened. "If you make trouble for that man, if you say one wrong thing, we could lose everything. The job, the insurance, the apartment. Everything I built on my knees so you could stand upright. Do you understand me?" Nadia looked at her mother. She saw 22 years of silence carved into Lorraine's face. 22 years of swallowed words. 22 years of making herself invisible on purpose. Choosing survival over dignity because a daughter needed food, medicine, school, and a future. Nadia wanted to say her mother was right. She almost did. Then voices came through the thin wall. Vaughn and Blaine, speaking Arabic, broken Arabic, clumsy Arabic, but clear enough. "When we go back inside," Vaughn said, "I'll read Section 12B myself. Tell her she's finished. And if she argues..." Vaughn laughed. "She won't. She's a cleaner's daughter. People like that don't push back. That's why they stayed on their knees. They are raised to accept it." Blaine said some things about Sheikh Karim seeming impressed by her. Vaughn answered with another racist insult. He dismissed Nadia as nothing more than a trained novelty who happened to speak Arabic. "Once the papers are signed," he said, "she can go back to carrying her mother's mop." Silence filled the supply room. Lorraine hadn't understood the Arabic, but she saw Nadia's face change. "Nadia, don't." "Mum, please." Nadia gently removed Lorraine's hand from her arm. Then she held it, squeezed it, pressed her mother's hand against her cheek, the way she had when she was younger, and her father's tapes made her cry. "I love you, Mum, but I can't stay silent about this." She kissed Lorraine's hand, then she turned and walked back toward the boardroom. Behind her, Lorraine leaned against the supply room wall and slid toward the floor. One hand covered her mouth. She cried, without making a sound. The way she had learned to cry in buildings where nobody wanted to hear service workers hurting. Nadia reached the boardroom door. She stopped, breathed, and heard Samir's recorded voice inside her memory one more time. "Listen first, Nadia. The truth is often hiding in what people say when they think you can't understand." She entered, sat down, opened Section 12B. Vaughn began reading the English clause aloud. Operational management fee, 0.4% per year, allocated to general fund administration and oversight. Ordinary language. Boring language. The kind of clause people skim because it looks routine. Nadia looked at the English version, then at the Arabic version printed opposite it. She read the opening line, then stopped. Her eyes moved slowly across the Arabic text. Word by word, the room waited. Vaughn watched her with a thin smile. The smile of a man who thought he had already won. The Arabic version began the same way. Operational management fee, 0.4%. Then the language changed. Words appeared that did not exist in the English version. A structured financing vehicle, a routing mechanism, a company name, Cressmont Strategic Holdings, jurisdiction, Cayman Islands, beneficiary, the personal investment portfolio of the Chief Executive Officer of Mercer Cressmont Holdings, Vaughn Mercer. The mathematics hit Nadia all at once. 0.4% of $1 billion, $40 million a year, over the 10-year life of the agreement, $400 million. Money belonging, in part, to Celeste Whitmore's pension fund clients, teachers, firefighters, transit workers. Money also coming from Sheikh Karim's sovereign fund, redirected through a shell company and into Vaughn Mercer's personal portfolio, hidden in plain sight. written in a language Vaughn believed nobody at the table would compare closely against the English. Nadia's hands came completely still. Her heartbeat seemed louder than the room. She had two choices. Read the English language meaning as though both versions matched. Protect herself. Protect her mother. Leave quietly. Forget what she had seen. Return to invisibility. Or read the Arabic version exactly as written. Word for word, in front of everyone. Expose the man who had threatened to destroy her mother's livelihood while sitting only a few feet away. If Nadia was wrong, even slightly, Vaughn would bury her, and Lorraine with her. If Nadia was right, she was about to end a billionaire's career from an interpreter's chair. She thought about her mother sliding down the supply room wall. She thought about Samir's cassette tapes. The same lesson. Always the same lesson. The truth is in what people say when they think you can't understand. Nadia lifted her eyes, not toward Vaughn, not toward Blaine, toward the room. Then she began. Section 12B, Arabic version. Her voice was steady, almost quiet. Operational management fee of 0.4% per year allocated through a structured financing vehicle to Crestmont Strategic Holdings, a limited liability company registered in the Cayman Islands. Vaughn's smile vanished for the sole and exclusive benefit. Blaine's pen slipped from his hand and struck the table. Of the personal investment portfolio, Vaughn stood suddenly, his chair scraped backward. Of the chief executive officer of Mercer Crestmont Holdings. Nadia paused, then looked at him. That would be you, Mr. Mercer. The room didn't gasp. Nobody shouted. Nobody moved. Something worse happened. Complete silence. Heavy silence. The kind that presses against the chest because everyone knows something has just broken beyond repair. Sheikh Karim slowly removed his glasses. He placed them on the table. Celeste opened her tablet. Vaughn stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, one hand gripping the chair so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The young woman he had humiliated had just spoken his secret aloud in front of the only people capable of destroying it. Vaughn exploded. That is a lie. He slammed his hand on the table. Water glasses shook. That is completely false. She made it up. She doesn't know what she's reading. She's a cleaner's daughter in a hoodie. She has no education, no credentials, no authority to interpret a legal document. He turned toward the room. Are we really going to let some girl we pulled out of a hallway destroy a deal we've spent more than a year building? This is sabotage. Some competitor is using her. Then he pointed at Nadia. Who sent you? Who's paying you? Nadia remained seated. She didn't shout. She simply looked at him from the interpreter's chair. Mr. Mercer, would you like me to repeat what you said in Arabic during the break? Vaughn's face changed. During the break, you told Mr. Kessler that when we returned, you would read Section 12B yourself and tell me I was finished. She continued. You also described me with a racist insult and said I was only useful because I happened to speak Arabic. Then you said, people like my mother and me don't push back because we're used to staying on our knees. Nadia paused. Would you like me to continue, sir? Because I remember every word in both languages. Blaine's face turned pale. He reached instinctively toward the contract folders on the table. Celeste's general counsel, Tessa Monroe, placed one hand firmly on top of them. Those documents are evidence now. Don't touch them. Celeste stood. She didn't rush. She smoothed her blazer. Then she looked toward Sheikh Karim. Sheikh, I am requesting an independent verification of Section 12B. Miss Carter has provided a translation. Mr. Mercer disputes it. I'd like your delegation to confirm which version is accurate. Sheikh Karim nodded toward his younger delegate. The young man had already been reading the Arabic text carefully. Hein looked up. Miss Carter's translation is correct. The Arabic version does not match the English. The difference is not a typographical error. It is structured, intentional, and financially significant. Celeste turned toward Vaughn. Her voice remained calm. Vaughn had spent years believing calm belonged only to people with power. Now Celeste spoke with a calm he could not control. You had told this young woman that if the deal failed, she would be responsible. You threatened her mother's job. You threatened their home. You tried to make her carry the consequences for your own conduct. Celeste paused. I want to be very clear about who is responsible for what happened here. Then she turned toward Nadia. Miss Carter, on behalf of Whitmore Heritage Group and the 300,000 pension fund members whose retirement savings you just protected, thank you. Nadia's hands were trembling beneath the table. Her voice stayed steady. You're welcome, ma'am. Celeste picked up her phone. Tessa, move everything to another conference room. Secure every document and contact the Securities and Exchange Commission. The boardroom shifted into controlled chaos. Tessa gathered documents. Blaine whispered urgently into his phone. Vaughn sat motionless, staring at the table like a man watching his own funeral. Then Sheikh Karim stood. He adjusted his robe, walked slowly around the table, past his delegates, past Celeste, past Vaughn, until he reached Nadia. The room quieted again. He spoke to her softly in Arabic. Not business Arabic, personal Arabic. The kind used around family. Your accent is unusual, he said. There is khartoum in it, and underneath that something different, something learned, not from daily conversation, but from recordings, from a voice you listen to alone. Am I wrong? Nadia's breath caught. You're not wrong, sir. Your father. What was his name? Samir Carter. Sheikh Karim became completely still. His expression changed. Samir Carter, the United Nations, a refugee resettlement conference years ago. He paused. I was the only interpreter in that room I trusted. Several governments wanted my testimony softened or silenced. Your father translated every word exactly as I spoke it, knowing there could be consequences for himself. I was a brave man, a good man. Nadia's eyes filled. She pressed her lips together. She refused to cry. Not yet. He never told me that story. I wouldn't have. Sheikh Karim's voice softened. I was not a man who kept score, but I remembered. The sheikh reached inside his robe and removed a black and gold Mont Blanc fountain pen. Arabic calligraphy ran along the barrel, a short phrase. Truth rises and is never overcome. He placed the pen in front of Nadia. Your father's pen is somewhere lost. Use mine. You earned it today. Nadia looked down at the pen. She couldn't speak. She placed her hand flat against the table to stop it from trembling. Then she felt someone standing in the doorway. She turned. Lorraine Carter stood at the entrance to the boardroom, still wearing her cleaning uniform, a cloth still in one hand. She did not step inside. For 22 years, that room had been a place she entered only after important people left. She cleaned the table, polished the surfaces, collected their trash. She had never stood there while the decisions mattered. Now, she watched her daughter sitting at that same table, the table Lorraine had scrubbed on her knees, and a sheikh who remembered her husband's name had just placed a priceless symbol of respect in front of Nadia. Lorraine covered her mouth with one hand. Tears flowed down her face without a sound. Vaughn refused to surrender quietly. He straightened his jacket, adjusted his tie, rolled his shoulders like a fighter preparing for another round. When he spoke again, the raw panic had disappeared. The polished boardroom voice returned, the voice of a man who had talked his way out of trouble for decades. Celeste, Sheikh, everyone needs to slow down, and held both hands open. What we have is a translation discrepancy. That's all. These things happen in bilingual contracts every day. A word changes. A clause is misaligned between drafts. It's a drafting mistake, nothing more. He paused, then smiled. The boardroom's smile, the one that had helped close hundreds of deals. We have spent more than a year building this partnership. Hundreds of hours, millions in legal costs. Are we going to throw it away because a young woman brought in from the hallway read one paragraph she doesn't fully understand? He looked around the room, face by face, searching for an ally. A nod, a softened expression. Anything. He found silence. Celeste stood again. She opened her tablet. After a few taps, she turned the screen toward the boardroom projector. A document appeared on the wall. Cayman Islands Corporate Registry. Crestmont Strategic Holdings, Limited Liability Company. Registered recently. Georgetown, Grand Cayman. Sole beneficial owner, Vaughn W. Mercer. Celeste left the document on the screen long enough for everyone to read it. Then she spoke quietly. A drafting mistake, Vaughn. You personally registered a shell company in the Cayman Islands. You are its sole beneficial owner. And the Arabic version of Section 12B, the version you tried to keep Nadia from translating, directs $400 million into that company, into your personal portfolio. She tilted her head slightly. Is that also a typo? Vaughn's smile cracked. Not all at once. Slowly. Like the first fracture running across a windshield. Celeste. His voice softened. We've known each other for 20 years. You know me. You know my character. I would never. I have known you for 20 years, Vaughn. Celeste's voice dropped almost to a whisper. I've known Miss Carter for less than an hour. She paused. I trust her more. The sentence landed like a locked door. Vaughn turned suddenly toward Nadia. Blaine moved with him. Two men in expensive suits closing in on a young woman wearing a hoodie. You. Vaughn's voice had lost its polish. You did this. You walked into my building. You sat in my boardroom. And you destroyed everything I built. Someone sent you. Someone is paying you. Tell me who. Schler moved close enough for his shadow to fall across the contract binder. Nadia stood slowly. She didn't step backward. She looked directly into the same eyes that had looked at her earlier and decided she was worthless. First, she spoke in Arabic, clear, unhurried, loud enough for Sheikh Karim and his entire delegation to hear. Then she translated her own words into English so nobody in the room could miss a single sentence. Mr. Mercer, when I first entered this room, you asked who had allowed a filthy black girl into your building. You ordered Mr. Kessler to remove me. You insulted my mother because she cleans your floors. You mocked my clothes and treated me as if intelligence had something to do with what I was wearing. Vaughn's jaw tightened. During the break, you spoke to Mr. Kessler in Arabic. You called me a racist name and reduced me to a novelty because I speak this language. You said people like my mother and me remain on our knees because it's somehow in our nature. You said I belonged carrying my mother's mop. Nadia took one breath. I didn't write any of it down. I didn't need to. I remember every word you said, every insult, every whisper you thought was safe. In both languages, her voice never shook. Would you like me to continue? Because there is more. The stenographer's hands had not stopped moving. The young Emirati delegate had a phone resting flat on the table with the recording light on. Vaughn opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came. For perhaps the first time in decades of boardrooms, Vaughn Mercer had absolutely nothing to say. Sheikh Karim rose to his full height. He clasped his hands in front of him, not like someone making a suggestion, like someone delivering a judgment. Mr. Mercer, his voice was firm. I noticed the discrepancy in Section 12B before arriving in New York. My legal team flagged it during our review. Every person in the room turned toward him. I didn't raise the issue. I wanted to see who in this room had honor and who would try to bury the truth. He looked toward Nadia. I found my answer. Then back at Vaughn. It was not you. Al Rashid Sovereign Investments withdraws from all dealings with Mercer Crestmont Holdings, effective immediately. There will be no renegotiation. Vaughn gripped the chair. Sheikh, we can restructure. We can amend the agreement. In my country, Mr. Mercer, we have a saying. A thief who steals in 2 languages is still a thief. I is only twice the fool. The boardroom doors opened. 2 building security officers entered. Behind them came 2 people in dark suits with federal identification attached to their belts. Agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Celeste had made the call after Tessa confirmed the Cayman Shell Company. Nobody was arrested at that moment. But Vaughn and Blaine were each served with federal preservation orders. No documents could be destroyed. No assets could be moved. They were instructed not to leave the building. Blaine accepted his copy with shaking hands. Vaughn didn't reach for his. An agent placed it on the table in front of him. Vaughn stared at the paper as if it were written in a language he had never learned. Maybe it was. The language of consequences was something he had spent most of his life avoiding. Nadia stood beside the interpreter's chair. The chair Vaughn had given her because he expected her to fail. The chair he turned into a threat. The chair where she was supposed to stumble, cry, and prove every ugly assumption he carried about people who looked like her. She was still wearing the hoodie, still wearing the old sneakers. The visitor badge was still clipped to her jeans. But now she held Sheikh Karim's fountain pen in one hand, and Vaughn Mercer couldn't bring himself to look at her. The deal didn't disappear. It changed. Later, Celeste Whitmore and Sheikh Karim met in a smaller conference room on a quieter floor. No enormous mahogany table, no crystal glasses, just 2 leaders, 2 legal teams, and 1 interpreter. Nadia Carter. The new agreement was clean, direct. Mercer Crestmont was removed from every page. The new partnership between Whitmore Heritage and Al Rashid Sovereign Investments closed at $1.1 billion more than the original arrangement. Without the hidden diversion, the numbers worked better. Nadia became the official interpreter for the transaction and a junior translation consultant. It was her first professional engagement, her first contract. She signed it with Sheikh Karim's pen. The ink felt heavier than ordinary ink, as if the pen understood the meaning of the moment. Nadia set it down and stared at her signature. A young woman who had entered Mercer Crestmont Tower carrying insulin for her mother had just signed a document connected to a billion-dollar transaction, using a pen given to her by a man who remembered the father she had lost. She didn't cry, but she held the pen a little tighter than necessary. Afterward, Celeste Whitmore did something no executive in that tower had ever done. She walked into the staff corridor, not the elevator lobby, not the executive lounge, the staff corridor. Fluorescent lights, concrete floors, a faint smell of industrial bleach. She found Lorraine folding cleaning cloths at the same station where Nadia had found her earlier. Same cracked hands. Same routine. Lorraine looked up and froze. In 22 years, no senior executive from the boardroom had ever come there to speak with her. Mrs. Carter. Celeste's voice was warm, not polished corporate warmth. Real warmth. Your daughter protected my company. She protected the retirement savings of 300,000 people. She did something a room full of lawyers, executives, and advisors either couldn't see or weren't willing to confront. Lorraine's lip trembled. She placed both hands flat on the table. I'd like to offer you a position. Director of Facilities Operations at Whitmore Heritage Group's New York headquarters. Salaried. Full benefits. Profit sharing. You'll have an office. A desk. A door with your name on it. Lorraine blinked. Ma'am, I don't have a degree. Celeste tilted her head. Mrs. Carter, you have helped keep a 60-floor building running for 22 years without a single complaint. You understand every system, every schedule, every vendor, every weakness in the building's operations. That isn't just experience. That's an education nobody ever gave you credit for. Lorraine looked down at the cleaning cloth in her hand. She had folded thousands of them, tens of thousands, under the same fluorescent lights, for 22 years. Then she sat down. Not on the supply crate where she usually rested, on the chair Celeste had pulled beside her, and Lorraine cried, not silently, not with one hand covering her mouth, not the kind of crying she had perfected after decades of learning to stay invisible. She cried openly, the kind of cry that comes from a place so deep you almost forget it exists. Celeste sat beside her. She didn't check her phone. She didn't look at a watch. She didn't interrupt. She simply stayed with Lorraine and let her cry for as long as she needed. The story spread quickly. Major financial newspapers reported that a Columbia student had exposed a $400 million fraud during a live billion-dollar negotiation. Other national outlets followed. International news organizations told the story of a cleaner's daughter whose Arabic uncovered a massive corporate betrayal. Nadia became one of the most discussed young names in American finance. Not because she had been the loudest person in the room, because she had been right. Federal prosecutors charged Vaughn Mercer with 12 counts connected to wire fraud, securities fraud, conspiracy, and violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Blaine Kessler accepted a plea agreement and testified against Vaughn in exchange for reduced punishment. Vaughn fought the case and hired multiple attorneys, filed motion after motion, gave interviews claiming he had been set up. None of it changed the evidence. I was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Full restitution was ordered. His assets were frozen. His name was removed from the tower. Mercer Crestmont Holdings eventually collapsed. The building was sold and renamed. The new owners kept the marble floors. They kept the mahogany boardroom table. They did not keep Vaughn's name. Later, Columbia University held a small ceremony inside the law school atrium. No crowds, no media wall, no spectacle. The law school dean attended. The head of linguistics attended. Celeste Whitmore came in person. Sheikh Karim joined remotely from Abu Dhabi. Nadia was awarded a full graduate fellowship in international legal translation. It was the first fellowship in the program funded by a sovereign wealth organization. Then Sheikh Karim made another announcement. His foundation would endow a new academic chair at Columbia, the Samir Carter Memorial Chair in Legal Translation, named for a man who died at 42, in the middle of a sentence, in the middle of a translation, at a desk in a small Harlem apartment, named for a father who left behind cassette tapes so his daughter could continue learning after his voice was gone. Nadia stood at the podium. She thanked the university. She thanked Celeste. She thanked Sheikh Karim. Then she said one sentence that silenced the room. I want to thank Lorraine Carter, my mother, who cleaned every floor between me and this podium. Lorraine sat a few rows back. She wore a new blouse. For the first time in years, she wasn't dressed in a work uniform. She placed one hand against her chest. Then she nodded once, the kind of nod people give when they know that opening their mouth might release everything they have carried for decades. Eventually, Nadia returned to the renamed tower. The Yemeni security guard at the front entrance recognized her immediately. His name was Salih. Same security post, same welcoming smile. When he saw Nadia coming through the revolving door, he straightened. This time, Nadia wore a tailored suit. A Columbia faculty identification card hung around her neck. A briefcase rested in one hand. She greeted Salih in Arabic. Hein grinned. Welcome back, Habibti. Nadia smiled and walked toward the elevators. She selected the 60th floor. Sheikh Karim's pen rested in her breast pocket. The same marble, the same elevators, the same floors her mother had cleaned while kneeling. But there was a different name on the building, and a different woman walking through it. Nadia's work eventually took her far beyond New York. She sat in a glass conference room high above the Dubai marina. Blue water stretched toward the horizon. Air conditioning hummed softly. A fresh contract lay on the table. It covered the next phase of the Whitmore and Al Rashid partnership. Nadia was the lead interpreter. When Sheikh Karim introduced her to a new delegation, he didn't mention the hoodie. I didn't mention the sneakers. He simply said, "This is the woman who reminded me that honor has no dress code." Nadia translated the entire session without a single correction. Afterward, Sheikh Karim leaned toward her and spoke quietly in Arabic. "Your father would be proud, but I think he already knows." Back in New York, Lorraine Carter had an office. Not a supply closet, not a service corridor, an office. It was on an upper floor of Whitmore Heritage Group's Manhattan headquarters. A window faced east. Morning light crossed her desk. On that desk stood a framed photograph of Samir. Beside it was the small whiteboard he had once used to teach Nadia Arabic letters when she was a little girl. Lorraine had kept that board hidden in a closet for years. Now it sat where she could see it every morning. Lorraine also hired 4 of the women she had once cleaned beside into salaried positions. Women who had spent years working quietly, invisible in company directories, unknown to executives whose offices they cleaned. They had desks now, benefits, doors with their names on them. It wasn't the whole world, but it was a flaw, and sometimes a flaw is where everything begins. Nadia later created the Samir Carter Linguistics Fund, a full tuition scholarship program for the children of service workers, janitors, hotel cleaners, security guards, kitchen workers, bus drivers, the people who keep buildings standing and cities moving while almost nobody asks what their children dream about. The first group included 12 students, 12 young people whose parents mopped floors, washed dishes, cleaned hotel rooms, guarded doors and carried other people's trash. On their first day, every student received a black and gold Mont Blanc pen. Each pen was engraved with the student's name and one phrase. The same phrase engraved on Sheikh Karim's pen. The same phrase Nadia carried with her. Truth rises and is never overcome. One pen became 12. A symbol became a movement. Vaughn Mercer began serving his federal sentence. The tower that once carried his name no longer did. Years of wealth had not protected the name he had built his identity around. And yet, the quietest part of this story had nothing to do with boardrooms, prison sentences, headlines, or billion-dollar contracts. One ordinary afternoon, Nadia sat on the front steps of her mother's apartment in Harlem. Lorraine sat beside her. They ate sandwiches from the same neighborhood deli they had visited since Nadia was a little girl. Lorraine wore an old cardigan she had owned for years. Nadia had Sheikh Karim's pen clipped to a notebook. They talked about almost nothing. A neighbor's new dog, the price of eggs, whether rain might come later, the kind of conversation that doesn't need a purpose. It only needs 2 people who love each other sitting close enough to share the silence. Nothing about the love between them had changed. Almost everything about the world around them had. And maybe that is where the deepest lesson of this story lives. It is easy to notice people after the world tells us they are important. After a title appears. After a company valuation is announced. After someone puts on a tailored suit. After a photograph reaches the news. But dignity was never supposed to begin there. Nadia deserved respect when she walked through the lobby in a hoodie. Lorraine deserved respect when she was folding cleaning cloths in a service corridor. Sally deserved respect when he was holding the door. The workers, whose children later received scholarships, deserved respect long before anyone knew their names. A person's value does not appear the moment someone powerful recognizes it. It was already there. Vaughn's greatest failure wasn't simply that he underestimated Nadia. It wasn't even that the person he insulted turned out to be brilliant. His deeper failure was believing he had the right to decide someone's worth based on a hoodie, a job title, a mother's occupation, or the color of a person's skin. If Nadia had made no discovery that day, his treatment of her would still have been wrong. If Lorraine had remained a cleaner for the rest of her career, she would still have deserved dignity. If Nadia had known only a few words of Arabic, instead of speaking it fluently, she still would have deserved basic kindness. Respect is not a prize reserved for exceptional people. It is the starting point. There is another lesson in the way Lorraine survived. For years, she stayed quiet because she believed silence was the price of protecting her daughter. It's easy to look from the outside and ask why she didn't speak sooner. But life is rarely that simple. A job can mean medicine, insurance, rent, food, a child's education. People sometimes endure things because they are trying to protect someone they love. That doesn't make the unfairness acceptable. It reminds us to be careful before judging the choices people make while surviving. Nadia's courage mattered because she understood the risk and spoke anyway. But her courage didn't erase her mother's sacrifices. In many ways, Nadia was able to stand because Lorraine had spent years carrying more than anyone saw. And Samir was present too, not physically, but through every lesson he had left behind. He could not give Nadia money. He could not introduce her to executives. He couldn't walk into that boardroom beside her. What he gave her was language, memory, discipline, a way of listening, and one principle: pay attention to what people say when they think you cannot understand. That lesson exposed fraud, but it also carries a gentler truth. How we speak about people when we believe they cannot hear us says something important about who we are. Kindness that exists only when someone important is watching is fragile. Integrity is what remains when we think nobody will know. The boardroom also showed something about responsibility. Vaughn tried to blame Nadia the moment the truth appeared. I threatened her before she began. Then he called her a liar when she succeeded. Then he called the fraud a drafting mistake when the evidence became impossible to ignore. Every step was another attempt to move responsibility away from himself. Real accountability begins when excuses stop. It doesn't require humiliation. It doesn't require revenge. It requires honesty about choices and the willingness to accept what those choices caused. Celeste could have walked away after saving her money. Instead, she went into the staff corridor. She looked for Lorraine. She learned what Lorraine knew. She saw experience the corporate system had ignored for decades. Then she opened a door. Lorraine did the same thing later for 4 women who had worked beside her. Nadia did it again for 12 students. That is how a second chance becomes something larger than one person. Someone opens a door for you, you walk through it. Then, when you are able, you hold it open for someone behind you. The scholarship program matters for that reason. Those 12 students weren't chosen because their parents had powerful titles. They were chosen because someone finally decided that the dreams of service workers' children deserved investment too. The pen became a symbol, but not because it was expensive. It mattered because of what it represented. Truth rises and is never overcome. Truth doesn't always rise quickly. Sometimes it waits inside a contract nobody reads carefully. Sometimes it lives inside a complaint nobody answered. Sometimes it survives in an old cassette tape. Sometimes it sits quietly in the mind of a young woman everyone else has underestimated. And sometimes truth needs someone willing to carry it into the room. That doesn't mean every difficult situation requires a dramatic confrontation. Courage has many forms. Sometimes courage means speaking. Sometimes it means documenting. Sometimes it means asking one more question. Sometimes it means refusing to laugh when someone else is being humiliated. Sometimes it means noticing the person everyone else walks past. That last one may be the simplest thing to carry from this story. Think about the people in your building, your workplace, your school, your hospital, the person who cleans the restroom, the person who empties the trash after everyone else leaves, the person who guards the entrance, the person who carries food into a meeting but is never invited to sit at the table. Learn a name. Say it. Look at the person when you speak. Not because that person might secretly be brilliant. Not because their child might someday save $1 billion deal. Not because kindness could benefit you later. Do it because being seen matters. And because nobody should have to prove extraordinary talent before receiving ordinary respect. If this story made you think of someone who has been overlooked, maybe reach out to them. If it reminded you of a moment when someone chose kindness toward you, remember that too. And if you have ever been the person people walked past without looking, don't let their failure to see you become the measure of your worth. Other people's assumptions are not a definition. A job title is not a definition. A hoodie is not a definition. A bank account is not a definition. Character is built through choices. Through what we do when speaking would be easier to avoid. Through what we do with power once we have it. Through whether we close doors behind us or hold them open. Nadia walked into Mercer Crestmont Tower carrying insulin for her mother. She left carrying a pen. But what changed her life wasn't the pen. It was everything that had prepared her to use her voice when the moment came. Her father's lessons, her mother's sacrifice, her own years of study, her decision to listen, her decision to speak, and her refusal to let cruelty decide who she would become. That is a quieter kind of strength, the kind that doesn't need to shout, the kind that can sit in a hostile room, breathe steadily, and tell the truth. If this story reached something real in you, share it with someone who has been overlooked for too long. Subscribe if you want more stories about dignity, courage, responsibility, kindness, and the people the world too often fails to see. And remember this, the truth doesn't need an expensive suit. Dignity doesn't need permission. Kindness doesn't require status. Sometimes, all it takes to change a room is one person who listens carefully, knows their worth, and is brave enough to speak when silence would be easier.